will go ahead and jump in, and I know folks will join us in progress. But welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our SVPLA partners meeting and this learning conversation on abolition. We'll spend the next hour and a half in community with one another, reflecting and learning a whole lot together. I'm Christine Margiata with SVP, and really happy to see so many familiar faces and lots of new faces as well. We mentioned at the top, we have a bit of a technical glitch where all of you are named Sharon Stratton when you enter the Zoom. Please go ahead and rename yourself so that we know who you are. Lots of Sharons as I scroll through participants. So just go ahead and rename yourselves when you have a moment. And Sharon, we can go to the next slide. Great. So just a bit about what the next hour and a half will look like. We'll spend some time connecting and grounding ourselves in this moment. And then really the bulk of our time today will be a conversation between three incredible leaders who I'll introduce in a bit, where we really center this conversation around what is abolition and how can we move toward that vision as a community. Yeah, appreciating some of the notes in the chat. You know, we have this theme of abolition, and I've been thinking so much about this concept of freedom. So really appreciate your reflections on freedom, being able to travel more than a 50-mile radius, finishing the bar exam, having less physical stuff, being in nature, floating in the ocean, getting divorced. First moved out of home, having your own space, being named Sharon Stratton. Very funny. Great. I really appreciate these reflections. So we'll have time today to listen and learn together, and then we'll give you a chance in some breakout rooms to reflect on what you've heard, to think about what this work means to you and how you might want to step in. Next slide, please. All right, some notes, and appreciate Sharon for her mindfulness about this always, and how we take care of ourselves in this virtual space. So please feel free to take care of yourself throughout this hour and a half that we'll have together. A note that we are recording, so if you don't want to be part of our recording, you're welcome to turn your video off, but we do love seeing you if you're comfortable with that. We know that this time means lots of potential interruptions. My kids will likely burst in at some point during this conversation. So just know that everything going on in your world is welcome here, your kids, your pets, your roommates. And please feel free to get up, stretch, move around as you need to. All right, so I want to ground us before we step into this conversation. Just want to ground us in this moment in time that we're in. So we now very recently hit the 6-month mark of this pandemic. We know that globally, nearly 1 million people have lost their lives to COVID, and over 200,000 right here in the US. We've been, for all of us, either grappling with being at home for the last 6 months or being essential workers that are not able to work from home. I think many people are experiencing social isolation, or the other end of the spectrum, taking care of kids or loved ones, being at home with family full time. The financial stressors of this time, folks have lost their jobs, lost their homes. So just an incredibly stressful moment for so many people, not just the threats to our physical health, but also our mental health and overall well-being. At the same time, we have a big election coming up. We have threats and fears around our democracy, challenges with climate change as we have fires making their way through our communities. And we know as we look at all of these, there is a disproportionate impact on our Black and Brown residents through COVID, through the threats to democracy, and through climate change. And so in this time, we've also seen what many have said is the greatest social movement that our country has seen in the uprisings over the last few months, as our country I think really seeks to grapple with anti-Black racism and the history of racism in our systems and structure in this country. So that's what grounds us in this moment. That's what we'll be reckoning with today. And I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the life of Breonna Taylor. Many of you, I'm sure, saw it in the news yesterday. The news of the officer who killed Breonna, who was not charged with her death, but rather charged with wanton endangerment for firing into a neighbor's home. So I wanted to bring her name into this space to acknowledge that she was a 26-year-old woman who worked in a hospital in Louisville. She was killed the day that this stay-at-home order started for our family, at least, on March 13th. And she was killed by police when they entered her home on a no-knock warrant. She was sleeping. So, as we grapple with this conversation around abolition, I was struck by that news yesterday and thinking about what does justice look like in our community, and trying to hold at once both knowing how our systems are designed to handle justice now, and what our dreams for what justice and abolition look like for the future. So I just wanted here just to take a moment of silence to honor Breonna Taylor's life, George Floyd's life, the 200,000 people in this country who have died of COVID, the 1 million people around the world who have died, and so many others who have lost their lives over these last 6 months. So we'll take a moment just to pause here and be with this moment. Thank you all. So I want to appreciate each of you for stepping into this conversation today, for your curiosity and intention around this concept of abolition, around these concepts of racial and social justice. I'm so glad that you're here and that we can reflect on both what this means and how we step into action together. So I'll say just a bit about SVP for those of you who don't know us. We are a community of people from across LA County who are committed to creating a more just and loving LA. We bring together nonprofit leaders and folks from all throughout this region who want to be a part of the movement for justice. So you all, just by nature of showing up today, are a part of that effort. I want to introduce our SVP team, many of whom you'll hear from today, but all of whom are on this call and are the day-to-day energy and heart and brains behind all this work. Ali Simon, Kelly Poole, Yolanda Enoch, and Sharon Stratton. Huge appreciation to our SVP team. And I'll share, before we jump into today's conversation, the last thing I'll just share is a bit about what's been going on at SVP over the last few months. We had a partner meeting, gosh, I believe it was back in April was the last time we got together, just as we were all beginning to wrap our heads around what this pandemic meant for us as a community. So in this time, we've had the privilege of launching a new initiative, our Racial Equity and Homelessness Initiative, which is the vision of Kelly Poole, who's joined our team. She brought this vision to our organization, and we're just so honored that she's here. She'll be leading our conversation today, so you'll get to hear more from her. But this initiative is all about how we support the sector, particularly the homelessness, the community that is doing the work of ending homelessness. How do we support that sector in being steeped in the principles of racial justice and lifting up the leadership of leaders of color in that space? We had virtual fast pitch, which I think many of you were a part of. We had over 400 attendees and raised over $130,000 for the 10 incredible initiatives that were spotlit, I don't know, that we shone a light on that evening. And we have the opportunity to continue a second year of our Systems Change Accelerator. It's usually a 9-month program, but given the current climate, both with its challenges and opportunities for real systems change, we wanted to stay with these 10 organizations to support them and partner with them through this time. And thanks to our SVP partner, Melissa Jones, we're also able to provide a second year of funding to those organizations. And finally, we've launched an online version of our anti-racism trainings. We have over 100 people participating there now as well, in addition to the folks who are participating in our year-long course. So a big part of our mission is on how we support white folks in this community and beyond in being champions of racial justice. So that's what that training is all about. And for those who haven't met our amazing accelerator leaders, these are the 10 leaders and organizations that we're working with this year. As I mentioned today, we will hear from 2 of those incredible leaders, Taina at Initiate Justice and Brian at Curb, but encourage you to check out all 10 of these organizations and the work that they do. All right, so with that, I'm going to transition and hand the mic over, and I'll leave you with this quote from Patrisse Cullors, who says, "With abolition, it's necessary to destroy systems of oppression, but it's equally necessary to put at the forefront our conversations about creation. When we fight for justice, what exactly do we want for our communities?" So that's what I am so excited to hear from our panelists today. So I will hand the virtual mic over to Kelly Poole, who I mentioned is a new member of our team, but not at all new to this work of justice. She comes to us with over a decade of work committed in this community to supporting people who are experiencing homelessness, to supporting the sector and the workforce, and to just being an incredible leader, both in the fight to end homelessness and the work of racial justice. So I'm so excited that she's on the team and leading the conversation today. Kelly, I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Christine. Hi, everyone. I put on makeup for the first time in the pandemic, and of course cried at the beginning because that's what SVP reflection and grounding time makes you do. I will also share that I am Zooming in today from a hotel room in South Carolina. My dad's going through chemo, and so I am awkwardly working in this weird space, and I'm on my phone. So someone just feel free to give me verbal cues because I'm trying to figure out how to do this thing, and I'm probably at a weird angle. But nonetheless, we are here. Tonight's going to be good. I'm really excited about this conversation. We want to, before we jump into the panel and really just dialoguing with Brian and Taina, we thought we'd give you all a chance to just share with us what's important for you around abolition. We know that it is the word of the moment, but it also might evoke some strong feelings. And so in the chat in just a second, I think, or maybe you already see it, we're going to drop in a link to a Jamboard. This is a fun brainstorming tool from Google. It's free, anyone can use it. Call Sharon after the meeting, she'll give you a tutorial. So we're gonna go to this Jamboard that maybe is up. Okay, head to the Jamboard and tell us what curiosities, joys, and fears emerge for you when you hear the word abolition. So you should see the link to the Jamboard in your chat. Is that true? Nope, not yet. I'm seeing Christine. Oh, there it is. So you'll see a link in your chat. Go ahead and click on it. And it's going to bring you into just a whiteboard. If you look to the left of your screen, you'll see some icons. Go down to the fourth one that says sticky note. And you should click on it and it'll open up a sticky note. I just put my name in so you all can see. And there are three groups of questions on the thing. When you hear the word abolition, what are you curious about? What questions do you have? What are you wondering? What do you want to know about it? When you hear the word abolition, what, if any, fears come up? Like, what are you questioning about how this works, how it doesn't? And then joys, what are you excited about? Like, what makes you so happy when you think about abolition? So those are the few questions. I'm going to delete my name. If you cannot figure out Jamboard, feel free to come off mute and let us know, or you can just chat Sharon or the group in the box and we can put the stickies up for you. So if you're not finding your way to Jamboard, feel free to just answer the prompts in the chat and we will hopefully get that there. Oh, I just realized I was probably moving people's sticky, but nonetheless, just put them up and we'll figure them out. These are good. What does abolition actually mean? Fears, having to live in community with my attacker. Fears, is it possible or impossible? Is it realistic? I get that one. Lots of good joys, lasting change, true liberation, relief in all caps. I felt that in my spirit. Curiosities. Folks are asking, what does abolition actually mean? Abolish what? Abolition from what? What does it look like? How does it happen? How quick does it happen? Good question. I'm seeing in the chat, transformation. Curious about the unknown. Yep, thanks for self-sorting. We'll take just a few more minutes, I think. Sharon, am I on track? Okay. Sharon and Christine, I can see, so feel free to nod at me. Just a few more minutes here to wrap up your statements. And then I'll just reflect back with the group. So I see in the fears column a lot of questions about possibility. Like, is it possible? Is it actually realistic? Here's a pretty lengthy one. I'm going to just open it up a little bit so I can read it. How will the powers that be try to co-opt abolition? Will we recognize that if/when that happens? Ooh, good question. Fears that some people can't be changed. That it's too good to be true. Love that. The unknown, possible or impossible. I'll pop to the curiosities. Abolish what? Abolition from what? How long is it going to take? What's the continuum of abolition? Ooh, these are good questions. Brian and Taina, I hope you're ready.
I'm impressed already. I'm like, I hope someone has the answer to these.
Right? We'll just end on sharing a couple of the joys. Seeing relief and equity, liberation, endless possibilities, dreaming and designing, and finally, the possibility of imagining a world where we don't lock human beings in cages. So we'll leave the Jamboard up. You guys, if you find it helpful to process, keep popping your thoughts in there. And then let's chat with our panelists, Brian and Taina. Here we are. So here's a learning conversation. The slide says we're going to have a learning conversation on abolition. Brian is with CURB, Californians United for a Responsible Budget, and Taina is with Initiate Justice. I'm Kelly Poole with SVP. So before we get started with the details, I'd love, Brian, maybe we'll start with you. Just tell us a little bit, tell us the most important thing about CURB. Just give us a 1 to 2 sentence summary for folks that don't know you.
Well, my name is Brian, and I'm from CURB, and I use he and they. And oh my gosh, CURB. Well, I think what is especially relevant about CURB is that we've been making budgets sexy since about 2003. And we're very happy that folks have decided to come along for the ride.
Love that. We'll hear more about what it means to do sexy budgets later, and I can attest, Curb makes it really fun. Taina, hi. Tell us who you are. Tell us the most important thing about Initiate Justice.
Hi, y'all. Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Taina. My pronouns are she and her. And I would say the most important thing about Initiate Justice is that we activate the power of people impacted by incarceration to be leaders in the political process to end it.
Oh, I love that. We're going to hear more about that in a moment. So tonight we want to be in conversation for about 30 minutes or so. So we'll probably get to some of the questions that popped up, and then certainly want to have Q&A and leave time to hear from you. So as we're talking, if you have questions, you can pop them in the chat, or you can wait until we get there. So in the spirit of this like exploration about curiosities, fears, and joys, Brian and Taina, whoever wants to go first, I'm curious about your journey to abolition. And I'm assuming that you both identify as abolitionist. If not, tell us where you're at on the spectrum and how you got to where you are today.
Hi, well, I'm happy to start. You are correct. I am an abolitionist, but it was a process to get here. So I first heard the term abolition, you know, in the context of the abolition of slavery. And, you know, so for folks who don't know me, I'm impacted by incarceration by having a loved one who was inside for 7 years. So I spent pretty much every weekend for 7 years inside of a prison visiting room. And I started thinking about the concept of prison abolition maybe in like 2015 or so. And when I first started thinking about it, I was like, yes, I agree that where we are isn't where we should be. We definitely should be more community focused, but do I really think that we should abolish the whole system of prisons? You know, the same fears that I think come up for many folks came up for me when I first began to learn about this concept. But after some time and doing some research and, you know, listening to great leaders like Patrice, who is, you know, I consider a mentor and also a close personal friend, I understand abolition to mean the ending of punitive justice systems and replacing those systems with systems that actually repair and prevent harm, that are rooted in community and that are, you know, rooted in principles of restoration and, you know, accountability, but not punishment. So I know that we will talk in a much more detailed way about like what abolition looks like to us. But, you know, today in 2020, I feel very clear that we can absolutely abolish prisons and jails and the police and 100% of the carceral system and keep our community safe.
I love that. Brian, tell us about your journey and where you are on the spectrum.
Well, it was a long road, but I identify as an abolitionist as well. And gosh, I really struggled figuring out where to plug in when I realized that it was essential that I started to use my life in a different way and use it to be of service for other people. But that didn't really happen in an altruistic way. I struggled with mental health all of my life. And I got to a point where my life really ceased to matter to me. And the only thing that kept me alive was the fact that I had to take care of my parent, who was very, very, very ill. So I'm a very practical lady. I was like, well, if I have to stay alive and I can't die, then I have to be of some kind of value while I'm here. So I started really, really looking about, you know, where should I plug in? And I've been really blessed my whole life, partially because I'm a nerd and I hang out with like college kids and stuff like that and professors, to know folks who were doing this work. And it always intimidated me so much. I didn't go to high school, or excuse me, I didn't graduate from high school. I didn't go to college. And everyone that I knew at first who was doing this work were like, the PhD of this, like the famous person of that, famous for academics anyway. So I always thought I didn't really have a place there. So when I told my friends I was ready to start doing some work, and they asked me what kind, and I thought about it, and I said, well, I want to help Black people, women, trans people, brown people, people who don't have any money, people who are gender non-conforming, any person who is marginalized or victimized. And my friend said to me, well, there is a place where all of the worst things happen to all of the people you described, and that places are inside of prisons and jails. And, you know, as a Black man, I was obviously, as Taina said, I mean, I was aware that things were wrong, but I don't think I understood the gravity. I don't think I understood that, in fact, that this could be described no other way than as the defining moral issue of our time, and perhaps all time as far as the history of this country is concerned. And I just got started right away. I spent 6 years as a volunteer monitoring, challenging, and exposing the systems inside of women's prisons that were abusing folks. And the people I've met there, the stories I've heard, virtually everyone that I work with either has severe mental health issues or was convicted to life without the possibility of parole. So the vast majority were convicted of murder or things that we would describe as, you know, very, very violent. And to this day, I have never met a single person that I thought belonged in prison. Now, you know, maybe they exist somewhere, but I'm just saying, as far as my lived experience, I personally haven't met them. And I'm very close friends with Leslie Van Houten, who is very well known for the Manson murders. And I wish she was my grandmother. She's an incredible, incredible person. When I began this journey, I think the key piece was that I wanted to alleviate suffering. That was my goal. I wanted to alleviate suffering. And I just didn't understand that the suffering that I must and would alleviate in order to do this work must, to a certain extent, be my own. Because, I mean, at its most radical, compassion enables us to understand the suffering of others as our own, you know? And I think abolition means that there's no separation between us, politically and practically. Fighting for collective liberation, I feel like, would dissolve those barriers. And once you fully understand that no life is disposable, including your own, it is from that space that I think that justice must exist. And in that space, tolerating injustice becomes impossible.
Thank you. Thank you both. I can't write quick enough. I'm so glad this is recorded. You can like play it back and back again. I think that was beautiful. And I think what was fascinating about that is that you both were semi on both ends of the spectrum, right? Taina talked about her own lived experience. And Brian, you talked about your curiosity. Like, I don't know, I just knew I wanted to help these people that were impacted. And so your journey to get there. And I'll just share for folks who don't know Brian and Taina or their organizations that, you know, for a lot of us, 2020 is the first time we've ever heard abolition, we've ever heard defund the police. Like, I know that. Like, some of you here tonight are like, what? I didn't even know this was a thing. And I just want to say that Brian and Taina have been in the fight since day one. When Brian talks about, you know, abolishing and challenging jail plans, the victory that we won early last year, where LA County withdrew the decision to build a $3.5 billion jail. Brian and Taina, two jails, stopped this jail plan. And my connection to abolition came about 7 years ago. I went to Inglewood to this little workshop at Chuco's Justice Center. And these critical resistance folks and other folks were talking about abolition. And I would keep coming back to these meetings and they were like, we're not gonna build this jail. It's not gonna happen. And they just kept coming back, like challenging. And so the victories that we're celebrating today, the conversations that we're having today, like Brian and Taina are the leaders of that. Like you have experts here, and I just hope that, and I know they wouldn't claim that for themselves, but I just want to set the stage a little bit to share with you, like, who you're hearing from. These aren't folks that woke up this year. These are folks that have been living this out and learning this and really ingraining this. So I'm grateful for both of you to be here and to learn from you. So let's get into the details. You talked, both of you, a little bit about like sort of what abolition isn't, or the things that you didn't want to see. So demystify that for a little bit for us. Like, what is abolition? What would you say it is? What does it mean? And what might people be misunderstanding about it?
I'm happy to start, and Brian, please feel free to fill in any gaps that I may have in my definition and my understanding. But the way that I understand abolition is to be the dismantling of all punitive systems and the creation of systems where we invest in communities, where we invest in health and social services first. So abolition is not just shut down the prisons, get rid of the police. Yes, it's that. But it's also, and probably first and foremost, is investment in community so that we don't have to, so that people are not harmed and are not committing harm in the first place. When I think about so many of the folks who are incarcerated now, like, let's break it down. Angela Davis says that prisons don't disappear social problems, they disappear people. And that's what's happening. And every single person who is involved in the criminal justice system right now is a person who ultimately our system has failed. So, you know, let's consider what folks end up going to prison for. Is it for robbery or burglary? How would that be different if we had a universal basic income and we could eliminate poverty in this country? Are people in prison for, you know, harm that they caused because of a drug addiction that they have? What would happen if we decriminalized drug use and we created, you know, rehabilitation centers that were actually effective? How many less people would end up using drugs in the first place if we actually had adequate mental health care and people were able to address their trauma and their mental health issues before resorting to substance use? If we want to talk about ending violent crimes, you know, such as like harming another person, killing another person, what would that look like if we shifted our culture so that we are no longer a patriarchal culture and believe in the idea of domination is power? So I believe that there are a lot of cultural norms that need to be shifted that are part of abolition. There are many policies that need to change, ways that we need to invest in communities first. And all of these are part of abolition. And then when, you know, ultimately folks do still commit harm, because hi, humans are humans and we all make mistakes. If we address this harm in a way where it's actually healing and we actually address the wrong or the harm that was caused and actually repair it and actually listen to the survivors, because the system is also not surviving, is not serving survivors of harm either. So what would it look like to create systems of accountability and maybe consequences, but not punishment? And what I mean by saying that is like, okay, if you have caused harm, maybe that means that what needs to happen is you need to apologize to the family, or maybe you need to pay some kind of reparations, or maybe you need to serve your community in some way. But what it doesn't look like is that we lock you in a cage for an arbitrary amount of time, disconnect you from your friends, families, loved ones, community, and really your own sense of humanity, just for the sake of punishing you and thinking that we can harm you out of harmful behavior. It doesn't work, and abolition is 100% the antithesis to what we have now.
Oh my God, I can't believe I have to follow Taina.
I was first, but if I follow you, okay?
She said all the things.
She said all the things. Now, as usual, Taina is on point. You know, I really think I'm reflecting on something Kelly said earlier, and I know this is going to sound like I am self-deprecating. And I'm so proud. I'm so proud of our victories, or whatever contribution I made to them. But it was standing on the shoulders of so many people. CURB's last executive director, Diana Zuniga, statewide coordinator, she has been fighting those jails for the better part of a decade, right? And she stood on the shoulders of other organizers, right? So what we really have is a community victory. And I mentioned that not to take away my props, but just to say that I think is one of the reasons why abolition will succeed where other social movements have failed. It's because it's decentralized. Taina brought up a really good example when she was talking about Patrice, her friend and mentor, and mine as well. And if, God forbid, if Patrice died tomorrow, it's not like MLK dying, right? We all know how to do this work. So they won't be able to stop us by just taking one of us out. So that to me is like a key piece. And they can't kill all of us. Well, I shouldn't say that. They can try, but they ain't gonna do it. They can't do it. There's too many of us, especially now that all the white people are coming along. They can't kill all the white people. Nobody would stand for that, you know? So that idea of it being decentralized, I think it's really is really important. Gosh, and I also want to say that, like Kelly said, most of these ideas are not new. So I hope nobody ascribes my brilliance to my recitation of them. Let's see. Well, and as a good example, I think this is something that Ruthie Gilmore says. She's a very well-known professor at CUNY. She says abolition means that one big thing needs to change, and that thing is everything. Oof. And it has to change from the root, not just from around the edges. So what abolition does is, hopefully, undo the ways of thinking and doing that sees prisons and jails as the solution to our social, economic, racial, et cetera, problems.
Wow.
That the work dismantles, chips away, interrupts harm, and not just state harm, interpersonal harm. It always chips away. It never adds resources to the thing that's killing us. That's the most essential piece.
Yeah. Say it again. That line again.
We must not add resources to the thing that is killing us. It must be starved. And this is where people have messed up doing criminal justice reform from the 70s until basically now. Is that we thought that if we picked around the edges, if we just did nonviolent, if we just tried to do drugs, if we just tried to do this, if we just tried to do that, if we focus on probation, if we focus on electric monitoring, that somehow these systems of control and oppression would change, but they don't. They just transform. That's the key. Yeah. You know? So
tell us, I want to
starving it.
I want to pause there to jump in and reflect with that. And I see in the chat someone asked about isn't that what Prop 47 was supposed to do? And I think that moment, that I love that phrase. I wasn't just being like church and call and response-y, like this principle that we cannot continue to invest in systems that one day will eventually have to abolish. Like, I think that is what's coming up right now, right? Folks are like, well, we can just get body cameras. We can certainly do more training. We have to do more training. And when you look, Brian knows budgets, Taina probably knows, when you look at the amount of money, imagine how much money it cost us to train LAPD, to train the Sheriff's Department. What if we dumped those resources into housing, education, mental health, and all of that? We wouldn't be propping up a system that we know we're eventually going to have to dismantle. And so I just love, I appreciate you sharing that. I am curious, we've talked a little bit about abolition. Sorry, you guys, I'm in my hotel room. I'm curious about this conversation around deserving and undeserving. And I think Taina's been chatting a little bit about that. You know, one of the fears that we saw on the Jamboard today was really about what happens if my offender's out there? Like, how do I deal with that? And then the bold question of, don't some people just need to be in prison? So I'm curious if either of you could speak to what that means and sort of what the abolitionist response to that would be.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond in part, and I'm sure that Brian will do a great job of supplementing anything that I have to say. First of all, I want to say that most abolitionists, if not all abolitionists, are also people who have been harmed are also people who are survivors of violence. So, you know, I'll share this, and I actually don't think that I've ever shared this on a Zoom before, but my aunt was stabbed 15 times by my uncle. And she survived, and my uncle only did 3.5 years in prison. And for a lot of people in our family, that wasn't really, you know, justice or our conception of justice. And I agree that it was not justice, and not because he did 3.5 years in prison, but because there was nothing done to help with my aunt's healing process, because there was nothing done to deal with his addiction issues, because he came out even less healed and more traumatized than he was before he committed such a harmful act. So I am an abolitionist because I understand that we are all at real risk of serious harm. So many of us are walking around with so much unresolved trauma, and you know, and the reason that people don't commit violence isn't because they're afraid of going to prison. It's because they have systems in place. They have communities who are supporting them and loving them and giving them what they need. So I think that it's really important for us to shift our focus around like what actually makes us safe and what actually creates safety. Police and prisons do not create safety. I agree, and this is what I was trying to allude to in the chat, that sometimes, you know, folks need to, if they are at risk of harming themselves or others, then they may need to be removed in one way or another to, you know, receive whatever support or healing they need. I do not 100% know what that looks like, but I know it's not going to happen in a concrete cage. I know that people need support, they need investment. And often our brains are automatically wired to go to like worst possible case scenario. Like, well, what do we do with these sociopaths who no matter what we do, you know, they're still going to be a danger to themselves or others? That is such a small fraction of you know, the overall population of people who are in prison. That I think before we even get there, let's talk about what do we do with the other 99.9% of people who are just responding to trauma, who are just responding to harm that has been caused to them, who they never got their own healing, and here is why we are where we are. And if we really want to talk about it, let's talk about systemic trauma and the way that the system has harmed us. Like myself, as an Afro-Puerto Rican woman, my ancestors have been harmed over and over again by this country. My ancestors were kidnapped from West Africa and brought here. They were enslaved in Puerto Rico. They were, you know, victims of rape. Even my grandparents were brought to New York to work in factories under false pretenses. Like, we are also victims and survivors of a harmful system. So where's the accountability for the system? So that's what abolition means. We are talking about true accountability for when we harm one another, but we are also looking at the system that is overall responsible for so much of this harm. So instead of talking about, you know, the small percentage of people who are committing horrific murders, and yes, let's talk about that. Well, let's talk about this horrific system that over centuries has murdered millions of people, and what that impact has been on us, and the ways that our system is still harming Black, Brown, Indigenous, marginalized people in this country. Abolition forces us to look at the full picture and not just interpersonal harm.
Thanks, Taina. Brian, we have just a minute if you want to respond, and then I want to do one final question before we get to Q&A.
Sure. I mean, I think Taina was so eloquent, and one of the things that jumped out at me was about answers. No one has all the answers. Abolition is a compass. It's not a map. It's a North Star. We need thousands of new ideas. I think Mariam Coppa says we need 20,000 new ideas in new places. And it's hysterical to me that, generally speaking, that question comes from people who have greatly benefited from white supremacy, which created this system. And it's always left to fucking Taina and I to figure out how to fix it. You fix it. Like, you did it. I didn't do it. I'm just explaining what's wrong.
Yeah.
That being said, we have been working on very, very practical, straightforward solutions that can address the problems that 99.9% of the folks in prisons and jails are facing.
Yeah, tell us practically about what some of those are right now in LA. What are those concrete opportunities, maybe in LA or other parts of the country? What are the top 2 or 3 that come to mind?
Sure. Do you want me to go ahead, Taina?
Yeah, go ahead, Brian. We'll start with
I'll
you
share.
and then we'll pivot
Well,
to
I think
Taina.
one of the most exciting opportunities is through the ballot. On November 3rd, we'll be able to vote on Measure J. So yes on J, please. Yes on J, big hearts. Thank you. And yes on J is a transformative ballot initiative, unlike any other ballot initiative in the country. It is one of the most robust justice reinvestment ideas, I think, anywhere on the county level in America. What it says is that 10% of net county costs, so that's money that's raised from local taxes, must be set aside in order to make communities who are disenfranchised stronger, especially Black communities, especially folks who have been dealing with systemic poverty, systemic racism, and give them finally the resources that they've been denied for so long. And this is not a defund the police bill. This is a refund the community bill.
Ooh.
That being said,
yes,
the bulk of LA County's net counting cost budget is the sheriff, district attorneys, and probation. So the money most certainly will come from there. And, you know, $1 billion, hopefully, over time, phased in, is not a lot of money, you know? This is just like an opening salvo against all of these problems that we're having at the county level, you know, and that people have been working on for decades and generations. But it is an opportunity to provide direct funding for the Alternatives to Incarceration initiative that organizations like Justice LA have been working on for 2 years to dramatically transform pretrial justice in LA County.
And I will interject to say there that many of you know I just came from the county and worked on the team with the fabulous Diana Zuniga and her community, you know, a collaborative, and the conversations that we're having today, that we're having tonight. Diana and other organizers like herself came into the bureaucracy of the county, facilitated deep racial justice conversations about restorative justice, about healing, and then led all 34 of the county departments through a process to really identify what it would look like to create a system of alternatives to incarceration. So I just want to keep reminding you, this is not new. This has been done. There's been tons of resources invested into it. So that's not a comment around Jay or whatever, but it is to say that there's a deep evidence-based validated report out there that maps out this entire alternative vision to jails and prisons. So we'll share that in a follow-up email if you want to check it out. And then Taina, just really quickly, what are the concrete ways that folks can explore abolition or invest in? Like, what are the opportunities in this moment?
Yes, thank you for that question, Kelly. So if I could also plug a ballot measure that I am working on, Prop 17, also known as the Free the Vote Act. Prop 17 is a statewide ballot initiative that would restore voting rights to people who have completed their prison sentence. And I believe that this is an abolitionist measure because systems of oppression will continue to exist as long as the people who are directly impacted by that oppression are made to believe that they don't have a voice. We need policies to change. And in order for us to end mass incarceration and achieve our vision of liberation and abolition, the people who are directly harmed by these systems need to be able to go to the ballot box and say, this is what I think that we need to be safe. Initiative Justice conducted a survey last year, and we published the results in a report called Democracy Needs Everyone. I can drop the link in the chat in a minute. But we asked, you know, over 1,000 currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, what do you think the community needs to be safe? And who better to ask than people who are there, who understand like what they needed to not end up there in the first place. And we are overall losing as a society when we are purposefully marginalizing the people who are directly impacted by these issues. So first and foremost, we need to be ensuring that people directly impacted by incarceration are the leaders in the movement to abolish prisons and jails. So that is one thing that we can all do now is support Prop 17 and Measure J.
Thank you. Thanks so much to you both. Thank you for sharing your stories. And we know that takes a lot of energy. We have some more time. Sharon, I cannot really see the chat situation, but I know that we want to turn it over to you all just to hear questions predominantly. If you have statements or want to give love or praise, you can pop that in the chat. But if you're really curious and want to just pick these experts' brains, hop in there. I think Sharon will facilitate us through this.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, we have about 15 minutes for a Q&A, and then we're going to go into some breakout rooms where we're going to invite you all to just kind of connect in your pods and reflect on a prompt that we'll put up on the screen. So I'm sure you have plenty of questions for our amazing presenters. You can go ahead and just pop them in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and feel free to chime in if you want to kick us off. And in fact, I might kick us off by reading the first question I'm seeing in the chat. So Brian, Taina, are you able to see the chat box as well? Okay.
Am I just looking at the Zoom group chat, or is there a Q&A section?
Just the Zoom group chat.
Yeah, just the Zoom group chat?
Yes.
Huh.
So what would you recommend for folks who are new to abolition as a starting point in terms of reading?
I always start folks off with Our Prisons Obsolete by Dr. Angela Davis. Short read, really lays the groundwork context for the work.
Yes, and I also recommend, Patrice wrote an article, I believe in the Harvard Law Review last year. I don't remember exactly what it was called. Let me see if I can actually find it, because I have it in this little resource guide that I have, where she talks about like 12 ways that you can practice abolition in your everyday life. And that is something that I highly, highly recommend.
Yeah, great question. We'll pull together some resources too, to put some other things out. Oh, it looks like Ev just dropped it in the chat, so check that out.
Yes, thank you, Ev.
Sharon, what's next? What are folks curious about?
I'm looking in the chat. I don't know if I'm missing questions. You all know that 6 months into this, my tech capabilities have been remarkably undeveloped.
Well, I will ask folks, if someone just wants to unmute themselves, you can totally fan girl or boy over Taina and Brian. If you just want to appreciate them or share, we'd love to hear from you. We've got some time.
Yeah, this is Cecily. You both amazed me when we were from the very first coaching session and all the way through the program. And Brian, you and I share a fiscal sponsor. I already sent an email to Jennifer calling you out. This is just amazing. And it's so helpful because I've read a lot around this. I haven't really read things that specifically address abolition, and then obviously like watch documentaries and all, but you presented it incredibly clearly. And I have a lot of reading and thinking to do, and I'm so fortunate that I'm so happy that you're part of this organization. You're doing amazing work.
I can just add, first of all, ditto what Cecily just said. Love and admire Brian very much. I'm so honored to be on this panel with you. But I forgot to mention that at the top of next year, Initiate Justice is going to be rolling out an abolition vision, where we're going to be putting out a report and a build package and a podcast. We're entering new territory over here, but we will be talking
fancy.
about. Listen, let's see how it goes. But yeah, we will be outlining like what our vision for abolition is and what we believe we need to do, you know, first, second, third, fourth, in order to get there. So please stay tuned for early 2021 as we get ready to launch our abolition vision.
So many great resources. And I think someone just popped in the chat. I apologize, I can't see the name, but just the acknowledgement that Jay and 17 are, you know, pretty over here. And are there some other concrete steps to get there? And I'll preface this by saying that we're about to go into breakouts where we ponder what are some of the practical ways that we practice abolition in our day-to-day lives. So you all will get to share that. So Brian and Taina, yeah, maybe just a few minutes from you about what might we do before we abolish the police? Like, what are some concrete ways that we do this every day?
Yeah, so I think that we are going to talk about it in our groups, but I think that we can start, you know, everything starts with ourselves. So, you know, if you're in a situation where you could call the police, consider what your other alternatives are. Do you need to call 911, or can you call a friend or a family member to make sure that you're safe? If there's a conflict that you need resolved, does it need to happen through the courts, or, you know, do you have a mutual friend who can provide mediation? Even, you know, internally within yourself, if you're having a conflict with someone and you're upset with them, what are your thoughts? Do you want harm to come to them? Do you want something bad to happen to them because you're mad? Or do you just say, you know what, I need to set a healthy boundary with you, and I hope that you figure things out over there, but I'm going to work on my own healing process over here. Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll get into this much more deeply in the small groups, but yeah.
Wow. Great examples. Brian, do you have one or two other examples you can add before we go into the breakouts?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest misconception about abolition is that it's just about decarceration. While I actually think, yeah, it's, you know, it's about reorganizing our society, our lives, and how we live together in the world. So, you know, this isn't, you know, just about prisons and jails. We have to fund healthcare. We have to fight for free healthcare. We have to fight for jobs. We have to fight for education. We have to fight for our youth. That's what abolition is. It is investing in a new vision of public safety that looks like people taking care of each other instead of hurting each other.
Oh, so well said. All right, let's hang out with each other. We want to hear from you all. The question is, what abolitionist practices do you have in your own life? And I think Sharon or Christine are going to send us off into little breakouts, and Brian and Taina will be there to chat with you. And then we'll come back together for a little bit of a debrief before we head out of here. That was fun. Our group, Brian left us with a cliff, so I don't know if we're going to get to hear from him again, but maybe he'll share. So just a few minutes, I think we have some time before we get to closing. I'm curious, maybe from someone that wasn't in my group, selfishly, because I want to hear from you all, what came up? What insights or feelings emerged? Like, what were some themes that you all shared in your group? Yeah, me too, Molly. They're fun. You can put it in the chat, sorry, or you can unmute. I think that's an option. Just
hey,
jump.
Kelly. So I had a really great breakout group. I wanted to say that. They were awesome. We had a great conversation. One of the things we were just talking about as we ended is that the thing that stuck with me was talking about how, like, individuals have not caused nearly as much harm as like our country has caused to us collectively.
Yeah.
And how do we even get to a conversation about reinvestment in community when, like, the example I brought up is that even in our communities, many people believe it's okay that if, like, a child can't afford the school lunch, they should not eat, right? And so, like, to me, when that child turns 30 and commits, like, partner violence against their partner, should it be a surprise that that's where they end up if we have told them since they were 5, you didn't have the $1.35 for lunch, you don't deserve to eat anything, you should be hungry? And so, like, I'm not surprised that we can't have larger conversations about, like, investing to make our community healthy when we can't even agree that a 5-year-old should have lunch, or that a 95-year-old should have access to nutrition, or that a veteran should not be homeless, or that someone like me who is immunocompromised should have health care, right? Like, it's becoming more clear to me why this conversation is so difficult, because we haven't even started to agree on the basics for the most vulnerable people, who then become those who commit transgressions against other people.
Oh, Alexis, that was great. Thank you for sharing. I'm seeing lots of nods and emotions and snaps. Does anyone from our group want to share, like, what themes or what things came up? Don't be shy. I don't know if folks are dropping things in the chat, but I'll just summarize some of our reflections, and then I want to give time to hear from Brian and Taina quick before we go. But I think some of the themes that came up for us were definitely around forgiveness as a practice of abolition, and just like leaning into the ability to forgive someone regardless of how, you know, intense or deep the harm was, and coming back to forgiveness perpetually. And then we also, someone shared a really great story about like looking at where their resources were and trying to actively divest from oppressive systems or institutions that caused harm. So it was a really great spectrum of folks just showing up every day and trying to lean into something that's less punitive and something that's more humane, I guess. So it is 7:48. No, it's 4:48 where you all are. Sorry. Sharon, I don't know if you had a specific closing convo or if you just wanted...
I have one last. This is Cecily from Margaret. Okay, Brian, finish. Brian is going to give us the one best personal
Do you want
abolition.
the most powerful personal abolition? So I'm like a cold shoulder queen. So like if my boyfriend makes me mad, I just completely turn around and like disconnect. And we're about to do some big house stuff together. And we made an agreement about how to handle situations like that. We have a special code word, and we can say it when things feel like they're coming up for us. And that means that we hug and pause. And because it's how I process, we're allowed to go apart for 5 minutes, and then we can rejoin together and talk about it. Hopefully it'll work.
I want to hug and process.
It's an everyday practice. Abolition is a journey.
That. Yeah, and what I heard is that, yeah, there was room for both of you to have your needs met, right? One of you needs to hug and calm, and one of you needs to walk away. And also the commitment, like the agreement, right? It's not one side or the other deciding what the rules are. Yeah. Okay, send us that list, because I have a feeling some of us want to try that with our partners. Sharon, did you want to close, or do you just want Brian and Taina to share some closing thoughts? Oh, okay. Melissa J., come on, tell us about next book club really quickly. Sorry, I don't know if Sharon was saying something, but.
It's so good. Go ahead, Melissa.
Well, I put it in the chat. We're starting Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy for our next book club. We're going to wait and start our discussions after the election, because I want everyone super engaged with our nonprofit partners in this work and advocacy around a lot of the measures and propositions on the ballot. But Emergent Strategy, if you haven't read it, I'll be reading it for probably the 4th or 5th time, is just a great text around dreaming and change, and really just being open to a radical new perception of the future. And it's just really enjoyable as a read, I think. Like it reads quickly, it's hopeful. And yeah, I just, even if you can't join us, it's a great book. And we're going to set up about 3 to 4 discussion sessions on different chapters. So you'll be able to join us for one or all of them. And so I hope everyone picks up a copy.
Thanks, Melissa.
Melissa's doing such a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Melissa, she deserves major props. She's done an amazing job with the book club. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a fun time, and virtual wine and cheese or soda, everything's welcome. Melissa will make it a hospitable place. All right, I think we have a resources slide that Sharon's going to pop up as we close our time together.
Yeah, so you'll see up on the screen now a list of resources that was sent across by Brian and Taina.
I don't think it's up yet, Sharon.
Oh, it's not up?
No.
No one can see anything. Oh, okay. Just God.
Sorry, I thought it might be me, but then I saw others shaking their heads. So.
I'm like looking at it. I'm like, what do you mean you can't see it? But before I jump into some of the resources stuff and closing out, I want to just appreciate Kelly for moderating us so beautifully today. So virtual or real round of applause. Kelly, you've flown across the country, made this work with differing time zones, and you've been with the team for 2 short or fast 2 months. So thank you so much for diving into this and for bringing Brian and Taina into the space to share their wisdom and their insights. Brian and Taina, we're just so grateful for both what you shared with us personally and the way that you show up in the work that you're doing in LA and have done for years. So thank you all so much. I wanted to make sure I acknowledged all you awesome speakers. So now hopefully you can see the screen. No? Oh gosh. I'm so embarrassed that this is recording as well.
It's fine. Oh, yay!
What? Oh,
there it is, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is not my genius. If that wasn't evident enough. So we've got up here some resources. Taina and Brian mentioned a couple of important things coming up. So Measure J, Prop 17. We've also popped up the link to their organizations if you're not already familiar. Sustaining their work is really important. It's why at SVP we feel so lucky to work with them, is that we also get to contribute financially our resources to bolster their work. So we really invite you to show up and support in any ways that you can. Brian, do you also want to share a little bit more about the resources that you linked, that you sent through with regards to supporting community?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think we really wanted to figure out a way for us to do the kind of work that we're talking about now. So I just identified 2 groups that are doing incredible work that's abolition-based. Trans-Latina Coalition, obsessed. I hate reentry services. They're notoriously horrible. Trans-Latina is doing an incredible reentry model that we're going to look for state funding for to make it exportable to serve the entire trans community statewide. The thing that's special about it is it's not just reentry services, it's holistic. They help with jobs, they show up with groceries if you're having a problem, they'll find a counselor, they're incredible. And mutual aid, if you don't know what that is, find out. Because it's what's going to keep us alive when all this shit keeps going down. And some people who are really incredible at it are California Coalition for Women's Prisoners. And that's where I did my volunteer work for the first 7 years of my work in abolition. And basically what they do is give people money. So it's wealth transfer. They take money people donate, and when people come out of prison, if something's wrong, they'll pay their rent. They'll help them put a down payment on a car. Whatever they need, we can give them money to get it. And a lot of people don't realize that sometimes the best way to help folks is not through a program, it's just by actually giving them money. In the same way that maybe a way to combat houselessness would be to give people a house.
Thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you bringing these efforts to this group. Taina, any final plugs, pitches, resources you want to make sure we recommend?
I mean, I would well, first of all, thank you, Kelly, Sharon, Christine, everybody, Yolanda, everybody who's part of the SVP team for having Brian and I always excited to talk about our work in abolition. These are conversations that even a year ago, I feel like we weren't having in the same way. So, just want to name that I'm appreciative for the opportunity and for the moment that we're in right now. yeah, our main campaign right now is Prop 17. So if you want to get involved or donate, please visit yeson17.vote. I think we're 40 days to the election. So, help us over the finish line. If this passes, California will become the 20th state in the country that automatically restores voting rights when folks get out. So help us be part of history. And you can also become a member of Initiate Justice. Our monthly member meetings are the first Wednesday of the month from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. And you can visit the Initiate Justice website to learn about those Zooms and learn more about the work that we're doing.
I just want to thank SVP so much. It's been so powerful to be able to grow and learn with them. On top of all of the support that folks from SVP have given us, it allowed me to get to know Taina better, who I've been in this work with, but we never did a specific project with one another. And I just feel so lucky to be in coalition with her and to hear her thoughts and her ideas and to benefit from her leadership. And I just wanted to remind everyone that maybe the most horrible thing under capitalism is that freedom isn't free. We need money to be able to do this work. Reimagine, which is Yes on J, needs to raise $5 million in the next, Taina, what did you say, 40 days? In the next 40 days. We've raised $1 million. That's not enough. The Sheriff's Association just gave the opposition $600,000 just to check. And forces are aligning against us. And we need our people to step up and make it happen and make this a reality.
Thank you, Brian. I know that you're working really hard in coalition, and these next 40 days are going to feel very long and very short at the same time, I'm sure. So I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us for today's discussion. It just feels really exciting to be able to unearth the fears alongside the curiosities and the joys. As a community at SVP, we're committed to continuing to have this conversation and supporting the awesome work of leaders like Brian and Taina. So we'll send a resource email with all the amazing resources that were mentioned throughout the call, including a recording of this webinar. But thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll stay connected and hopefully see you at a future SVP event.
Y'all were wonderful. Such smart questions. So awesome to talk to people that actually get it.
Yeah,
Take care, everyone.